What a bizarre day so far this has been. The team just left to go to the beach. The sun is finally shining here in Maine. It has been a very soggy trip so far. I think we've had maybe 1 or 2 days of sun and then just absolute torrential rain the rest of the time, which is great for me. I love the rain. And it makes it really easy to stay inside and get done everything I need to get done. But the rest of the team just left to go to the beach, thank God. Give me a little peace and quiet. There are neighbors moving into the place next door. It's been chaotic to say the least around here. But it's been a while since I've said thank you to those of you who are hanging around, lingering on this channel. I appreciate it. It's interesting. I still don't know what this channel is. I just met someone, a new person here in town, and they looked at me and said, "Oh, are you the vlogger?" And I was like, I don't know. Am I a vlogger? This doesn't feel like a vlog. Maybe I don't know what a vlog actually is. Am I a vlogger? I don't know. I don't know how I feel about that. To get this far in my life, 54 years, 30 years to one profession, 13 years at Blurb, and someone says, "Oh, are you the vlogger?" I was like, bizarre question. Not sure how to answer. I'm just an American. Oh boy. So this is technically a Q&A. Maybe I should open the questions on my trusty laptop. It sounds like my phone is blowing up as well. I probably should have some props for this because a couple of these questions, and by the way, I'm one person with one opinion. Take everything I say with a grain of salt. Who knows? I might have been lying to you this entire time. Dan MILNOR might not even be my real name. I might not have even been a photographer or got a degree in photography or done any of the things I've said in the past. It is, after all, YouTube. So hang on. I got to get my prop. It's in here, by the way. My trusty pack. We're going to talk about stupidity in a minute because it's rampant. And there's a lot of weird stuff happening in the world. But let's get to some of these questions and then we're going to move forward. And this is going to be all over the place. Whether or not we get finished or not, I don't know. This is lawn mowing season in Maine. Things here grow so fast that everybody mows their yard like every 35 minutes. So there have been helicopters and strafing runs and people on mowers all day long. Cross your fingers, peeps. Okay, question number 1. At some point, can you tell us about the techniques that you've used to socially engineer solutions to access restricted events or venues? Wow, that's a mouthful. Let me use it like a teleprompter and read it again. At some point, can you tell us about your techniques you've used to socially engineer solutions to access restricted events or venues? Okay, so there's 2 things we're talking about here. You're talking about how do I get into events that are places that I'm not supposed to be, but there's a second part that's more important, for me anyway, which is how do I get access to people who may or may not necessarily want me there? So let's take the first one first, because we are logical people. I don't go to places that I'm not really wanted. That's not my thing, because the problem is the kind of work that I want to do is based around people. So I want to get access to people and then return to those people again and again and again. So I'm not somebody that like sneaks into venues that I'm not supposed to be. For example, and this is kind of timely that you asked me this now, I just came back from Albania. And there was a woman in Albania, I want to say she's Russian, but I'm not 100% sure. I don't know all the details of her story, but she's an Instagrammer that's known for sneaking into former Soviet military installations and making pictures and putting them on Instagram, which is all fine and dandy if that's your thing. I have absolutely no interest in her or that style of work or doing that myself. That's just not my thing. She went into Albania, tried the same thing, got caught, spent 9 months in prison. To me, if you do that and you get caught, it's do the crime, do the time. There's no whining, there's no complaining. You do the time, you get out. If you want to go back to doing that work, you have every right, I guess, to do it, but that's not my thing. I don't think a person like that's really involved with the people. In fact, they're trying to avoid people at all costs. I'm the opposite. So I need people. The second part of the question is, there are often times when I start stories that I'm around people who either don't want me there or they don't understand what I'm doing, because the idea of what long-form documentary work is hard for people to get their head around. So you have to have a really good 30-second elevator pitch to explain who you are and what you're doing. And I also carry a field guide with me, a printed field guide. So when someone says, "What do you do?" I hand it to them and say, "This is exactly what I do." That's a major icebreaker. it's getting harder and harder and more difficult to do this kind of work because people are so suspicious. Everybody's got some sort of capture device and they're posting things immediately, and that puts people on edge. That's from law enforcement people to everyday civilians who are suspicious the second you get out of your car. So you have to be able to explain yourself, you have to have the right personality, and you have to have the right work to be able to show them to say, this is what I'm doing. And then you build trust and you're able to go back again and again. So I'm not somebody who socially engineers access to things or places that I'm not wanted. I don't have the patience to do that kind of stuff anymore. I'm lazy. I'm an a-hole. What do you expect? Let's move on, shall we? Question number 2. Behind door number 2. Remember Bob Barker? Is Bob Barker still alive? If he is, he's cyborg. Guaranteed. Hyperalloy combat chassis, covered in real flesh and hair. You want to live? Come with me. This next question is going to be... It's going to be particularly prickly for some people because it has to do with this right here. It has to do with this. Yes, this camera. This is a camera question. By the way, I just got this little thumb thing today. Works pretty well. Yeah, we need to talk about this. And for those of you out there, you're going to be like, oh, I can't believe you're talking about a camera. Yeah, I did. By the way, did I mention that that's mine? I just got that. But here's the thing. This has come up a lot of questions. A lot of people asking me about this thing. This is a strange little camera, but there's a reason why I have it. And it's a multi-part reason. And I've learned a lot about that camera since I've had it. But we have to go back in time here to like 2011. I was a recipient of the first model of the X100 series, which dates back, I think, to 2011. Got that camera. 2 weeks later, broke it in spectacular fashion on stage. Flew off my arm in front of like 300 people. Smashed into pieces on the stage. Unfixable, unretrievable. And then I thought I waited and bought the second generation of the camera, but I don't know if I did or not. I might have bought a second copy of the first generation. And then I had a friend who was living on a glacier, and he called me and said, I live on a glacier, I need that camera. And if you're sophisticated or you're a Brit, you might say glacier, because that's what more, sophisticated people do and say. But as Americans, we say glacier. And you might want to take a picture of those because they're all going away, but that's a whole separate story. So anyway, my friend's like, I live on a glacier, I need that camera. And I was like, well, by all means. So I sold mine to him, and then I promptly forgot about the whole X100 thing. Because the X100 at that time was kind of wonky. The autofocus was not great. The camera itself was not great. I don't think the lens was all that spectacular. And frankly, I didn't make anything good with that camera. Over the years, apparently there's been 5 generations of it. I think this X100V is the 5th generation, the latest one, obviously. I wasn't giving it much thought. And then all of a sudden, somebody went on TikTok and said, that's the coolest camera in the world. And it exploded and took off and sold out worldwide. I don't think Fuji was able to keep up with demand. I know they issued a press release about what they were going to do or not do with the camera. I know there's back orders all over the place. I know that the used market is crazy. That speaks to a lot more than photography and cameras, this idea that someone on TikTok could do something like that to or with a product. Someone told me that some of the people that they're around who are trying to get their hands on this camera only want the camera to take photographs of the camera and to pose with the camera, but they have no intention of using it. So I think the first thing to realize with this camera is that it's become sort of a cultural phenomenon, and that there's probably 15% of the user base who doesn't actually want to use it. They just want to pose with the camera. If that doesn't speak to the stupidity of the world, I don't know what does. Although I have another example for you that I just thought of. I'm on my bike the other day. I'm riding through the downtown area of the town that I'm in right now, which is a very small town, very touristy. So there's one street through the middle of downtown, which of course is bumper to bumper traffic because we're idiots and that's how we design our cities, our towns, everything is based around the automobile. I'm on my bike cutting down between the cars and the curb, which is about a 2-foot wide space. I'm going slow, cutting long, and I look up, there's 2 adults. They're probably in their 50s. And they're standing on the curb looking at the street, and they're like this. They're like, they're looking left, they're looking right, they're looking at the ground, they're looking left, they're looking right, they're looking at the ground. They're just baffled. So I pull up like 10 feet away and I just stop and I listen and I watch. And they're like left, right, street, left, right, and they look at each other and they go, how come we can't cross the street? Why can't we cross the street? And some 6-year-old walks up and says, hey, dumbass, you're not at the crosswalk. Use the crosswalk. And these two 50-year-old adults, who I guarantee you had at least a high school diploma, probably college degrees, could not figure out that the reason why they couldn't cross the street was they weren't at a crosswalk. We got an abundance of dumb here, people. It's outrageous. It's surrounding us all over the place. That's a perfect example. So 15% of the X100V users never going to use the camera. They just want to pose with it. That's idiotic and moronic and speaks way more about our culture and society than I care to. The second point of this thing is all about Fuji. So this is the second point of my Q&A. Someone asked me, oh, by the way, this is how it was asked. Where is it? It almost looks like you're using an X100V, but that's impossible because we all know that you don't like that camera. So the fact that it looks like you might be using one doesn't really match up with the reality, and thus I would like to be reassured. Yes, I bagged on this camera forever, and now I'm using one. So you have not, yes, you have been fooled, tricked, conned by me. So this is point number 2, which is about why the hell are you using an X100V? And the first sub-point, maybe it's point A, point 2, point A, exhibit 1, was the fact that 15% of the people who buy this camera are never going to use it. Very bizarre. Point number 2, and this is 100% credit to Fuji. This camera looks really good. It's sexy. It looks really good. And oh, by the way, it literally fits in the palm of my hand. It is absolutely tiny and very, very light, as we all know. That's, I think, one of the perks. But Fuji did a great job in the design of this thing because it looks absolutely fantastic. Number 3 is where we get interesting. This is a very capable camera. It's very capable. I wasn't sure because, remember, my brain goes back to the original version of this thing. So it's a capable camera. I just taught a class in Albania. One of the students in Albania had this camera. And I got to work with him over a 10-day period. I got to see his work on a consistent basis, basically every day. And I looked at his work and I was like, oh, this guy's a good photographer. This guy knows the kind of work that he's after. He can consistently make the same style of photograph again and again and again, regardless of where we're at. And he's using this camera. And in my head, I was like, oh, that's good. That means that Fuji solved a lot of the issues of the first gen. I can see why people are interested in this camera. It's very capable. Point number 4. Well, let's go back to point number 3. The fact that he was making work with this camera, in the back of my head, I was like, oh, that's good for me to know. Because if I ever had a camera like this, potentially it could really lighten my load when I'm traveling to teach. Because when I'm traveling to teach, I'm not really focused on my own work that much. I'm shooting as we go, but my goal is to be studying and watching the students in the field. I need to see what they like and don't like. I want to see how they see the world. I want to know what spacing they like and don't like. I want to know what light they like and don't like, so that I can better help them when we're sitting and editing and critiquing and building books. I need to know how they navigate the world. So my photography is way down the list. Their photography is at the very top. So I don't need a lot of camera equipment to do these trips. And in my head, I was like, wow, this thing is so much smaller than any other camera I have. If at some point down the line I would ever get one of these, I could probably take advantage of it strictly for these trips where I'm teaching. Number 4, this is a Snapshot camera. Can you feel that? Can you feel the hate? The warmth of the warm glow, the fuzzy glow of hate coming through the screen? This is a Snapshot camera. It is. It's a Snapshot camera. But I love snapshots. Yeah, waited for it. Had tricked you again. You thought I was going to bag on it. Because I was like, oh, it's just a snapshot camera. It's inconsequential. It's not. Snapshots are really important. I think if you go back through the history of photography, the vast majority of consumers and prosumers in the world, we all made snapshots. I have gotten on a plane and purposely put myself through the agonizing torture that is encountering TSA folks from around the world. I put myself on a plane to fly to another country simply to shoot snapshots. I went without any story in mind, just to look around, just to shoot snapshots. This camera is perfect for that. It's so light, so small, which brings me to the 5th point. This is a camera that you never have the debate, should I take it with me? I'm going to dinner, should I take it with me? I'm going to get a drink with friends, should I take it with me? I would almost guarantee you, if you shoot a Sony a7R5 in a 24-70 or a Nikon Z9 or a Canon whatever, you've probably had that conversation with yourself, like, do I really want to carry this thing with me? Talk about stupidity, and I know that's being a little bit harsh, but the other day I was on the beach, I had this pack with me. This is not a huge pack. This is very small. This woman comes up and goes, "Are you going on a mountaineering expedition?" And I was like, "What?" I'm wearing like a mesh Speedo with a tearaway front. She goes, "Are you going on a mountaineering expedition?" I was like, "Not that I know of. Why?" And she was like, "Well, I saw the pack." This pack. She thought I was going on a mountaineering expedition. She had I guarantee she graduated from high school. My guess being is where we are right now, she has a college degree. This made her think I was climbing Everest. I don't get it. But the Fuji, you never have to have that conversation because it is so tiny. You never have to think about it. And that is probably the single most important aspect of any modern camera, is the fact that you don't have to have a debate whether or not you're going to carry it. And not only that, carry it out in your hand instead of on your shoulder or in a bag. It's always out, it's always there. That's a brilliant little aspect of this thing. The last thing I'll say about it is this is an incredibly capable camera. It's far more capable than I thought it would be. I've used it seriously, mostly seriously. I've used it like 1.5 times, where I left this place, which is not my place, it's where I temporarily am, to go out and see what I could find photographically. Which, granted, where I'm at is a little bit limited. I literally go back to the exact same spot over and over and over again with varying weather conditions and just photographing the exact same spot. But I went there and thought, okay, I'm going to go and actually try to make some pictures with this thing. There are a couple things about it. The viewfinder can be dark a little bit at times. The electronic viewfinder can be a little dark depending on the weather. But you can flip over to the analog viewfinder, which is a little brighter, a little white box, shows the parallax, all that kind of thing. I prefer the digital viewfinder. And if there's extremely low contrast and you've got like a wide scene, sometimes the autofocus will search. But that's true of pretty much any camera I have now, even the XH2S and the XH2. If I was in that same environment, or if I'm shooting clouds or a sky, sometimes it'll search. On the flip side, there was a little monster of a child on the beach, just a little hellion that had like a belt-fed bubble machine gun that was just rattling off these huge bubbles, and I happened to be downstream. I was downrange, downwind of this kid, so the bubbles were coming at me. And I was like, I'll just autofocus on one of the bubbles. So I have a translucent bubble moving perpendicular to me at like 20 miles an hour. And I just whipped the camera up, and it literally locked on focus on that bubble, which was very much a surprise to me. I figured the autofocus would be okay, not great. You'd have to learn the tricks around how to use it. It's pretty darn good. So I'm impressed with this camera. The goal for me now is to find a project where I just use that camera. I think anytime I have a new camera, I find something where I commit to just that camera and I leave everything else behind. And I just use it and use it and use it until I finally put it through the paces enough to know what I can and can't do with it. I don't really see there being much with this I can't do other than any long lens needs. Obviously, it's a built-in lens, but it's pretty cool. I put some feelers out for a project here locally with a friend of mine, and he said, well, it's probably 50-50. The person I want to photograph is not super camera friendly, and so it might take some convincing, or most likely he's just going to say no. But maybe I get lucky and then I have a little nice, contained, concise project that I can go back to again and again and work and make some work with this camera. But overall, so far, so good. And you know me with technology, I'm so damn good. I will just master it. I'm going to sell some presets. You should buy all my presets and my Lightroom workflow catalog. Just kidding. I opened up Lightroom the other day and it didn't find my catalog for some reason. It just said, like, the drive didn't show up, the catalog didn't show up, and I was like, I just started bawling, just crying. Like, I got to start over. I hate photography. I hate you. I hate Adobe. I hate everything, oxygen. I hate humans, and I just sobbed uncontrollably. And then I unplugged it and plugged it back in, and there it was. And I was all fine, and then I would deny that I was ever crying. That's how it works with me. Number 3, do you think people of a given minority, in my case LGBT, have special qualifications to present and represent that demographic through a photographic project? That's another mouthful. Let me reread this one. Do you think people of a given minority, in my case LGBT, have special qualifications to present and represent that demographic through a photography project? Yes, of course. If you're an insider in a community, you absolutely have an advantage and can tell that story from a unique insider perspective. That's true of every demographic or subculture or gender or race or whatever it is you want to identify as or with. An insider is going to have, in some ways, a much easier time of pulling off that story. But here's the interesting thing. Again, let's talk a little bit about stupidity. We find ourselves in a world now where there's plenty of people out there who are just pissed at every single thing out there. And what you're starting to see, which has been happening for quite some time now actually, is you're starting to see people saying, hey, wait a minute. Okay, MILNOR, you're just a run-of-the-mill Caucasian male. Here are the stories that we feel, and we being a very nebulous group, these are the stories that we feel you can cover. These stories over here, oh no, you're just a run-of-the-mill Caucasian male. You can't cover those stories. Oh, you want to do a project about in the African American community. Oh no, you can't do that. That's colonialism, that's cultural appropriation, that's racist, whatever it is. This is starting to happen more and more and more of people saying, you can do that, you can't do this. That is complete and total BS. No matter what you did to appease those people, you would never appease them because the list of what they would not want you to do is going to grow and grow and grow. And the approved list of what you can do will narrow and narrow and narrow. These people should be told to F off and go away. You have a right, whether you're LGBT or anything else, you have a right to cover stories about the world that interest you. And if you are part of one of these demographics or groups or genders or cultures or whatever, you should welcome people from outside coming in to help tell your story so that all of us can better understand the world. All of these walls that people are putting up, they're putting it up for their own selfish reasons. They're not putting it up to help anybody else or help any other demographic. They're doing it because it satisfies some little twisted thing inside of them that makes them feel like they want to put their finger on you and crush you down. So I don't adhere to any of these beliefs that as a certain race or culture or subculture or gender that you are limited to who and where you can photograph. That is utter BS. You should be able to go and do anything that you feel interested in, that you want to do a story about. You should have the freedom to go and do it. That's how I feel. But as an insider, absolutely take advantage of it. Look, I don't know anything about bullfighting. I've covered bullfighting, both traditional bullfighting where the bull dies, and I've covered bullfighting that's bloodless bullfighting, which is a Portuguese origin, where the bull doesn't die. The only thing I know about bullfighting, try to avoid the horns. That's pretty much it for me. If you tossed me in there and said, all right, MILNOR, you're up, in my head, to-do list, only one item, avoid the horns. So someone who's from the bullfighting community, that grew up in that community, that trained as a child to be a matador, he or she, in the case of Elizabeth Moreno, who's somebody I photographed in Mexico, female matador, unbelievable. She had an aura about her that is undeniable. If she turned around and wanted to do a photo essay on the bullfighting community, she would get something entirely different from what I got because she has trust. She comes from that community. She has access that I could never dream about getting. She would get it. I hope she doesn't do it because then I'd be pissed and I'd have to trash her because, she'd be taking my assignments. Just kidding. You know what I mean. All right, let's move on. Number 4, this is unrelated to photography, but again, my life is not entirely about photography and photo books. I would be incredibly narrow-minded and probably pretty boring if it was. I have a lot of interests, like hook kicks, practicing my hook kick just in case I need to deploy it somewhere, maybe on the beach. I don't know. Maybe there's a bully kicking sand and I have to hook kick him. It could happen. Do you think if Trump wins next year and stops supporting Ukraine with guns, that the world's democracies are in danger? I'll read it again just because that's the theme, the trend. Do you think that if Trump wins next year and stops supporting Ukraine with guns, that the world's democracies are in danger? Ooh, Porsche Turbo just drove by, black. The world's democracies are in danger whether or not Trump runs, wins, keels over. It doesn't matter. They're in danger. There's a lot of authoritarianism on the rise in various parts of the world. Pretty much every region of the world has a country or two where authoritarian leaders are on the rise. Trump is an absolute and utter buffoon. So he's not the guy that invented authoritarianism or racism or white nationalism or any of that stuff. Trump just made it acceptable to talk about it in public and also to not condemn it. He made it an open source talk. And this goes back to 2016 Charlottesville, where he, in a desperate attempt to not alienate any of his voting base, said, hey, yeah, there were good people on both sides of this equation, meaning, yeah, those white nationalist dudes carrying the torches and saying the Jews will not replace us, those guys, remember that? That actually happened in the United States in 2016, oh, by the way. Yeah, Trump it was a softball to say, look, I don't want anything to do with those guys. Those guys are a nightmare. Everything about what they stand for is wrong. Trump didn't. He said, hey, good guys on both sides, because he will do and say anything to get votes. We've seen this happen a gazillion times over with him. He lies like you and I breathe. So whatever that moment on that day that he thinks is going to get him votes, he'll talk about it and say it and claim it, even if it's completely contradictory to what he said 24 hours earlier. But Trump didn't invent authoritarianism. There's 70 million people in the country that voted for him, and a lot of those people are completely and utterly okay with authoritarianism and also with white nationalism and a whole range of other things. I think there's an America that we think we are, and then there's the America that we actually are. And I think this probably applies to many other countries around the world, where if you grow up in a country, I don't know, let's say Uruguay, you're probably told a certain fairy tale about being from Uruguay, which is the same thing that happens in America. We're told we're always the good guys. We're always spreading joy and peace and things in the world, but it really doesn't accurately portray who we are as a nation. It's way more complex than that. So authoritarianism and democracy is in danger all over the world. And the only good news is, if it really comes apart, the end is going to come really fast. And if you survive, you may or may not live long enough to try to rebuild society in a better fashion. That's about all we can hope for at this point. Okay, enough with all this positivity. Let's get back to something serious. Like, hey, point number 5. You know what? I'm going to skip 5. No, I better keep it in line because I'll never remember and I'll screw it up. Question number 5 is also unrelated to photography and bookmaking, and I know what's going to happen. I know exactly what's going to happen with you jackals. You guys are still percolating on that point number 2 about the X100. I know it. You're all sitting there. You're probably not even going to watch anything of what I'm saying right now until the end of this film, because you're already stopped listening to make comments about the X100. I guarantee it. I know how you think. I know everything about you. And there'll be like 3 people who will listen all the way to the end of this. And they'll be like, well, I don't care about politics. I love Donald Trump. And the Tooth Fairy left money for me last night. And this next question is about cycling. But it's a good question about cycling, which is, how do you incorporate it into your everyday life instead of using your car? This is a little bit complex, and it's going to vary greatly depending on who you are, where you live, and sort of access to certain things that you may or may not have. I think there's a lot of us out there who want to utilize the bike a lot more, but we can't. Either where we live is too remote, or there's no safe way of using the bike, or you're not in shape enough to ride a bike, or you don't have access to a bike. There's a million valid reasons why that you may or may not be able to incorporate a bike. But here's the thing. If cycling is important to you, and I don't mean going out with your cycling kit and doing 100 miles, I'm talking about using your bike as a tool. You have to make a few critical decisions. And the first one is, I am adamant I want this to happen. If you're adamant about finding a way to use your bike as a tool instead of your car, not all the time, but even part-time or once a week or whatever it may be, you have to make that decision. I will make this work. Number 2, find the low-hanging fruit. Find something that's easy. You need to mail a letter. You need to return something that's within a 5-mile radius of your house, which, by the way, a 5-mile trip encompasses like 80% of all vehicular traffic in America every year. Are these really, really short commutes or errands. So most of the time, there's a way to incorporate in some way, shape, or form. For some of you that live in rural parts, that might mean putting the bike on a car, in the car, getting it to a certain point, and then utilizing the bicycle, which is not the best case scenario. But again, you're trying to find a way to make this work. I live in a place where the bike is at least in part usable and a favorable tool. Even though it is a 4-season climate, there's plenty of days in the winter where it's snowy or it's incredibly cold or icy. It's a little bit tricky. It's also at 7,000 feet and it's very hilly. So for me to get in town and back out is about a 20-mile ride, which for me, because I've been training quite a lot, and again, I committed to the bicycle, that's not a huge feat for me to pull off a 20-mile ride. Even if I'm carrying things, I'm going to the post office, I'm going to the bank, I'm returning library books, I'm going to a meeting, all of those things, I can do it off the bike. Also, the bike I have is a Swiss Army knife bike that I can use for any single situation I find myself in. Here I've been doing 35-mile loops on the road because I'm training for a potential ride in West Texas later in the year, which is going to be a road ride. Now I'm riding a drop bar adventure bike. It's basically a drop bar mountain bike with 2.35 knobby tires on it, and it's a single speed. There's nothing about that formula that I just explained to you that's built for the road. But guess what? I'm doing 35-mile loops in the morning on this bike. It works great. It's fun. It's not the fastest thing in the world, but it's super comfy. It's easy to ride. I can also turn off and go straight down mountain bike trails. I can ride into town to do shopping. I can go to the post office. I can go to the bank. I can do anything I need to off the back of this bicycle. That was purposeful. When I originally bought the original version of this bike in 2013, that was the plan. I wanted a Swiss Army bike that I could use for one bike for everything. And then you start slow. When I first started using it as a tool for my life, I started once or twice a week. When I'm in Santa Fe now, depending on time of year, I'll use it 5 or 6 days a week. So I'm saving a lot of mileage on the car, but I'm also saving a lot of money because you could charge yourself 50 or 60 cents a mile, and you'll see how quickly that adds up in terms of savings from using your bike over a car. Exciting? Okay. And, I didn't even get into the e-bike thing. Why is it always a fat guy on an e-bike going 30 miles an hour with no helmet who comes around me and kind of looks down like, look at me, loser, on a non-e-bike, and his giant gut out in front of him as he's like ripping to go down to the bar? That happened here a couple of times on the last ride. And it's a guy and never has a helmet on. It's just like all the ingredients are there for Darwin to say, yeah, survival of the fittest. We need to weed this character out. Maybe it'll happen. Maybe we get lucky. We weed him out. I don't know. Could be a sniper. You never know where their snipers are around here. Okay, so question number 5. No, I'm sorry. Question number 6. I was wondering if the kind of developer can affect the sharpness of a negative. Absolutely. Your developer, we're talking about black and white film here, people. You know what black and white film is? Yeah, let's hope so. If not, you're probably at the wrong podcast or the wrong YouTube or whatever this thing is. Am I a vlogger? Is that what I've come down to? Is that really where I'm at? God damn it. Yeah, your developer will make a huge difference. I started with Tri-X and D76, which was that was the baseball and apple pie of black and white film in America. That combination was probably responsible for more historical black and white imagery in the US than any combination in history. D76 was great. The problem for me was when I got outside of school and I was shooting more and more, was mixing D76 required you to heat the water and then let everything cool off before you could use the developer. And because of that, I discovered HC110. And the great thing about HC110 was the bottle cap that came on a bottle of HC110. The bottle cap was the exact amount of developer I needed to process a 4-reel tank. And pretty much every time I left to go shoot something, I was processing at least a 4-reel tank. So it was so easy, and you didn't have to heat it, and it mixed easily with just stirring it into the water and putting it in the tank and going. So HC110 became my developer of choice. And that was again, a middle-of-the-road developer. It wasn't exotic or super sexy or different than anything else. Later in life, what came along was Xtol, Kodak Xtol. And this had the developer in Xtol was like a citric acid developer, which meant it was a lot healthier for the environment than D76. So most of the labs switched from D76 to Xtol. And by this time, I was shooting a ton of film. I'd be going to the field and maybe shoot 20, 30 rolls at a time because I was working on projects. I would come back, ship that film to a lab. The lab would process it using Xtol. It was great. It's really consistent. It'll work with any film. It's a great developer, but not, again, it was like a Toyota Camry of black and white developers. Then I started going to Tijuana, Mexico with another photographer named Eric. Eric, if you're watching this, I'm going to hook kick you in the head next time I see you, just for fun. You're never even going to see it coming. I'm going to reach my hand out like, hey, haven't seen you in a while. Hook kick, just for fun, just to get your instincts back up. Be ready for it. So anyway, Eric lived in San Diego. We would go to Tijuana together and work on projects and shoots. And he had a dark room built in a cave. That's a whole nother story, which I think I shared with you before. If not, who knows? Maybe I will at some point again tell you that story. And I saw Eric's negatives. And I was like, whoa, what is this? And he was using Tri-X in Rodinal. And Rodinal accentuated the grain, but also just put a definitive edge on every piece of grain. Imagine golf ball grain, but razor sharp. And I was like, I love Rodinal. Rodinal came in a tiny bottle, and you got to use a syringe, so it looked and felt shady when you were buying. If you see anyone with a syringe, your mental drop-down menu just goes, heroin. That dude's doing heroin. Even if he has, a Leica M6 around his neck, you're like, heroin. That guy has a syringe. When in fact, he's probably just a Rodinal user. It happens. It starts with Rodinal and it ends with heroin. It's a natural progression. Can you blame him? No. So yes, it can have a huge impact on the look of your negatives. So experiment. And also think about this: temperature, agitation, all of those different things can accentuate how each of these developers work. So hot Rodinal with constant agitation is going to give you a very different look than standalone Rodinal developer with no agitation. I can't keep giving you all these secrets. They're not secrets. Yeah, but these are all our best tricks. What movie is that? Someone has to know that. Come on. Okay. Question number 7, something like that. 8, I don't even know anymore. How do you make a book on an iPad? Very carefully. I don't recommend making books on iPads. I don't like the software for bookmaking on iPads. I don't really like iPads as creating tools, with a few exceptions. I still think the iPad is a bottleneck compared to a laptop. Every time I think I'm going to use my iPad for everything, I end up immediately going back to my laptop. There are more slots, there's more ports, it's easier to get stuff on and off of it. There's full software applications and not apps. It's a better thing. Blurb has an app to make books, but it's so limited, I just wouldn't even recommend it for you. If you're serious about bookmaking, start with Blurb Bookwrite. It's free, works on any platform, and if you're really serious about bookmaking, then start investing in something like Adobe InDesign. That is the industry standard. That's worth using to make books. Books on an iPad, not so great. It's just too limiting for me. Okay, point number 9, 10. In your last Q&A, you mentioned briefly how you edit your images, or which ones made the cut. So out of 1,000, you ended up with approximately 10. Thanks, a-hole, for rubbing it in. 1%. Does that represent your average? Most likely. What do you do with the rest? Do you keep them all, delete them all, keep them? Oh, I know where you're going here. Until recently with my XT2, I used to keep everything. That made sense. It does. It makes total sense. But with the XT5, I know where you're going here. Don't do it. I don't even need to read the rest of it. But with my XT5, the files are larger. And now I'm finding myself saying, why am I keeping all this stuff? And I'm just going to throw everything away except the 2 or 3 frames that I think are good. Don't do it. Do not do that. Look, if your only goal in life, if you're using the new Fuji app, which is fantastic, by the way, compared to the old one, the app on the phone that allows you to transfer images from the camera to the phone, it works really well. If your only goal is to transfer images from the camera to the phone and put those images online as fast as possible, I don't give a crap what you do, because to me, you're not a serious photographer. You're an addict that just needs bots and strangers to tell you that you're good. So there's no point in you even being here, because you're not of interest to me. I know that sounds harsh, but let's face it, social media is ruining the world, and it's just me. It's me against the world when it comes to this topic. But no, seriously, if that's your only goal, it doesn't matter. Throw everything else away, because just putting stuff online is not going to do you or anybody else any good, and it really doesn't matter. But if you're serious about photography, you want to get better, you want to learn to edit in sequence, you want to tell narrative stories, and you want to build narrative publications, you do not throw anything away. Those images will come back at some point in time. You're going to be sitting there designing or building something and saying, oh crap, I could have used that image that at the time I didn't think I needed, and I threw it away. Storage is dirt cheap now. Go buy a 10 terabyte portable hard drive. Buy 2 of them. Plug one in each side of your laptop every time a new job comes in. Put it on both. 10 terabytes is going to keep you for a long, long time. If you want to do a super tight edit from those drives and upload to redundant cloud platforms like Amazon Glacier or Backblaze B2, that's a great thing to have so that you can have access to the very best images no matter where you are in the world. And then when you come home, you go back to your drive system. Do not throw things away. I just posted in my community section this morning the fact that I was part of the Crit House, which I posted some of the other Crit House films over the past couple of weeks. And the one I posted today was about me getting my work critiqued by the other 3 people in the group. And that's the first time I'd had a critique in a long, long time. So it was kind of fun. I don't really look for people to critique my work at this point because I'm not really producing the kind of work that needs to be critiqued. It's not that good. So I pulled an older body of work, we looked at it, they critiqued it. That body of work, which I shot on for 4 years, at the time I was editing from my negatives and not contact sheets because I didn't have any money. And so contacts were super expensive at the time. So I would just edit from the negative because that's how I edited when I was in the journalism world. No one had time to make contact sheets in the newspaper world. So you'd edit from the negative. So of course I saved all my negatives. And a couple of years later, I went back to that same body of work and I pulled an entire second edit from that work that I had missed. So I had 4 years to edit that the first time around, and I managed to miss an entire second edit of imagery that I ended up using in that final product, whatever. You know what I mean. Anyway, the same thing happens when I'm shooting digital. In my head, as I'm in the field, I know the home runs that I've made. I'm pretty sure what I have and don't have. But what I don't have, that gray area, is essential, especially when you're bookmaking. Do not throw things away. That is the sign of amateur hour. It is. It's amateur hour. I know you don't want to hear that, but I'm here to tell you the truth. I'm here to hook kick you in the head when necessary. Okay, next question. What is your opinion of the photographic work of William Eggleston? Never liked it. I know, blasphemy. Never liked Eggleston's work. Never did. Still don't. But here's the thing. It's perfectly okay for me to say that. It's perfectly okay for me to say that's work that doesn't resonate with me. I know he's a legend. Every film hipster online is either stealing from Eggleston, Shore, Todd Hido, Joel Meyerowitz. All the film hipsters are out copying that work. Often not giving any credit either to the fact that that's who they're stealing from. Todd Hido right now is probably the most stolen from photographer that I can think of when it comes to people online trying to mimic someone without giving them credit. Todd Hido's house hunting in particular is probably one of the offenders. The generation prior was Ryan McGinley, Terry Richardson, David LaChapelle. Everybody was trying to copy from those guys. I don't resonate with their work either. So I was never a huge Ryan McGinley, Terry Richardson, or David LaChapelle fan. I was never a huge Stephen Shore, William Eggleston fan. Love Joel Meyerowitz. But here's the thing. Just because I don't resonate with Eggleston's work, Shore's work, David LaChapelle's work, Terry Richardson, Ryan McGinley, what I resonate with is the impact that they had and continue to have on photography. Their positive impact, whether or not I like their work or not, is what's important because it elevates photography in the public space. So there was a randomness to Eggleston, which I didn't like. I didn't relate to it. I think that's why a lot of younger photographers, a lot of film people on YouTube, a lot of YouTubers in general relate to it because it does look random. It means you can walk around and shoot condiments on a table or a car in a parking lot without talking to anybody and basically convert the file to look like his work. And then all of a sudden, oh, hey, I'm making work like Eggleston. That's not how it works. The problem for all of you folks is that Eggleston already exists. What are you adding to the conversation? In most cases, nothing. So for me, the people that I resonated with were the folks like Gilles Perez. When I saw Telex Iran, I was like, what is this? Like, that completely and utterly blew me away. When I saw Sebastião Salgado's work, the depth of that work, the people, the fact that he was in these other cultures for extended periods of time in incredibly difficult scenarios and producing that kind of work, that's the work that I resonated with. Dancing on Fire, Maggie Stieber, I saw that work in college and I was like, holy cow, this is what I want to do. That's who I want to be. I didn't look at Eggleston and Shore and say, I want to be like that guy. It just didn't. So to each his own. Everybody has different likes and dislikes. It's perfectly fine. So yeah, that's my take on Eggleston. And I'm sure there's probably somebody building a little doll of me right now and about to set it on fire. I wouldn't be surprised. Explain the dog photograph in Paris. That's specific. That's a very specific question. And to think that I know exactly what this person's talking about because I shot an entire thing on dogs. Yeah, so there's a picture I made where there's a little rat of a dog and he's ripping around. And I was working on this project that I got commissioned to go to Paris to do. I had done one chapter of this project in Palermo, Sicily. I showed it to someone in San Francisco. When I got back, that person said, oh, I really like this project. Where do you want to go next? I said, Paris, New York. I'm listing off all these cities. And this person said, okay, I'll commission you to go to Paris. Go back and shoot this in Paris. So I went back to Paris, worked on this project. And in the midst of this project, I made this frame. And all this is a dog. It's a one-frame image. It's a dog that's jumping from the ground level up onto a wall. And because the dog is extremely backlit, it's throwing a shadow of the first half of the dog onto the wall in front of me. So from where I'm standing, it's shadow dog background. And it's a one-frame moment. I was vertical with the camera. I basically knew that there was a picture with this dog if I got lucky enough to get the dog in a position that I liked, because this little rat was ripping. He was like on Jolt Cola and was just circling it like warp speed. And I got lucky. This is just putting myself in a backlit scenario, which I'm going to get to in a minute based on another question. I like shooting backlit when the light's not so great, and got lucky on the timing. Or maybe it wasn't luck. Maybe it's because I am a absolute hook-kicking Jedi when it comes to photographing dogs in the wild, like David Attenborough. Here we are in the Tuileries, on a glacier. Not really. I would hook kick him too. Why not? Just to see how his reflexes are. Okay, last question. How on earth, and I think this related to somebody asking me about wedding photography, which is always like the scene in Jaws where Quint scrapes his nails down the chalkboard. And in my head, I've convinced myself I was never a wedding photographer. No, that never happened. Not at all. Nope, I don't know what you're talking about. It was like Trump and Stormy Daniels. Who? Stormy who? No idea what you're talking about. That's how I am with wedding photography. I'm like, don't know what you're talking about. I've never even been to Palm Springs. So I was a wedding photographer. I was. Hi, my name is Dan. I'm a wedding photographer. Yeah, so here's the thing about weddings and bad light. It's going to happen. But I would remember when you get a job, any job as a photographer, you have more power and control than you first think, most likely. When it comes to weddings, you really do, because the client is waiting to be helped in a direction. And they're looking at people like the planner. They're looking at the person who is the liaison to the location where the wedding is going to happen. Those people, the planner and the location person, they're going to, if given the option, they're going to stack the deck in their favor. Whatever part of the event that they're involved in, they're going to make it the best for them and the easiest for them. That's what I would do in their situation. As a photographer, you have to do the same thing. So I would meet with a client and they'd say, well, you're going to get married at Caraccia in Palm Springs and they want the ceremony to be at 7 p.m. And I'd be like, great, I don't care what time they want the ceremony to be, because I'm telling you the ceremony's going to be at 4 p.m. Because it's 6 p.m. and I would point up at the mountain range outside of Palm Springs. I'd say, see that right there? At 6 p.m. you lose the sun behind the mountains. And then it gets dark really fast. At 4 p.m., you're going to have nice diffused light coming over. It's going to be perfect. Gives you way more time. Then we don't have to rush any of the work after the ceremony, which, by the way, the 20 minutes after the ceremony, after the bride's left the stage and walked down the aisle and back, and everybody's filed out, that next 20 minutes is pure gold. It's pure gold. It's some of the most honest photography of the day because the pressure is off. The party hasn't started. The horrendous group shot crap hasn't started. People are actually genuinely happy and celebrating without scripting. So I want that 20 minutes, and I want that 20 minutes in the best possible light. Then you have the light to shoot the group shots and all that stuff, and plenty of time before the party starts. But it's me getting to the planner and saying, you're not doing it at 7, you're doing it at 4. And so you have to be demonstrative when it comes to that. If you're stuck shooting in bad light, and believe me, shooting in Southern California in weddings, you're going to hit bad light, you have to know things like how to shoot backlit imagery. Shooting backlit will save you in all kinds of horrendous light. I love to shoot backlit, and that means shooting into the sun, so the sun on the opposite side of your subject and you're shooting towards them, as opposed to what they taught me in photo school, which was always, oh, the sun has to be over your shoulder and you have to be shooting with the light. Give me a break. I never shoot that way anymore. It's always, if possible, shoot into the light. And then also, as you're moving around and you're shooting, and this applies to not just weddings, it applies to anything. I shoot backlit all the time when possible if the light's not optimal. And also if the light is good, even if there's direction to it, I'm often looking for directional sideways or quarter angle light as opposed to light falling straight on the subject itself. For some reason, digital cameras to me don't handle front lit, late light well at all. I've never liked that look. I can handle side light, quarter light, backlight, but I don't like front light. Even if the light's great and colorful and coming from a direction, I don't think digital files handle that really well for some reason. But you also have to constantly scout light where you can work. So as you're moving around, I am constantly looking for places where I can make my kind of picture. So if the major scene in front of me is not good light, I'm looking at periphery. I'm looking at whatever. If I go down to the place I like to shoot here, I'm looking at vehicles. Are there people in the shade of a vehicle? Is there a structure? Is there a boat coming in that's going to throw a shadow that's going to be there briefly, but it's going to be a spot that I can actually make a picture? That's all I do when I'm shooting, is look at light. I'm just looking at light, looking at light, looking at light, and then waiting for the pieces on the chessboard to move to create my style of composition. And then the timing, you have to be good enough and fast enough to make it. Like, for example, if you had a Fuji X100V with a brand new thumb grip. Yeah, thumb grip. Oh, look, it folds. Because maybe at some point, if I ever figure out what that dial does, maybe I want to use it at some point. And now I can. How you like me now? Okay, that's it. Thanks for sending questions. Again, I'm one person with one opinion. I hope this is valuable to somebody out there. Nobody listened to this. You guys are chewing on the X100 thing. I can tell. But anyway, if you're bad, I'll be back.